Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're discussing payback time for European nations who now have to engage in very unpopular belt-tightening exercises, and also in the United States, where it's a similar story as they race the clock to avoid an August 2nd shutdown of the federal government there. In what some have compared to 1993, when the federal government shut down, when a Democratic president and a Republican Congress were at war with one another. Barack Obama, by the way, last week said, the good news is we're not Greece, a theme that he reiterated this Tuesday when the Senate reached a budget compromise.
So far, at least, the markets have shown confidence that leadership here in Washington are not going to send the economy over a cliff. But I think it's very important for in these next couple of days to understand it's time to get down to the business of actually solving this problem.
Romain Rancière, in Boston, where you are right now, do you get the feeling that it's a different location but the same debate?
No, I think it's a quite of a different debate. I think nobody has really doubt about the current solvency as U.S. government debt. I think the question is more like a political debate about two sides of the L, and especially with more polarization between the Republican and Democrats. And what at stake is what will be the size of the government, not only fiscal balance, but also the size of the government. So the Republican, they try to push around these debt ceiling things that I think will be lifted up, I have no doubt. They try to win a battle on trying to put down and to reduce the size of government. So I think there is two different issues. One is fiscal responsibility, and on this, there can be an agreement between Republican and Democrat on a plan to reduce gradually deficits. But then there is another debate between like the extreme right of the Republican Party, the Tea Party, and the rest of people about trying to take the occasion to push an agenda to drastically reduce the size of government. So I think it's a quite different debate, in my view, at least part of it.
A different debate, but I want to ask you this question. Fabrizio Coricelli, there was a piece by John Kay in the Financial Times this Wednesday where he compared with last year's fiscal crisis in California, where 30-year bonds were 3.25% higher than comparable ones at the U.S. federal level. And here in Europe in 2007, when trouble started brewing, it was 1/10 of that for the bonds for places like Greece and Italy. Sort of the idea that there's a sort of that markets just had this impression that all along that whatever happens, Brussels would bankroll the problems that would arise in those Mediterranean countries.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the idea before this crisis was that any country belonging to the euro would be no risk of default. So there was no actual big difference in terms of the interest rates in all countries. And what we're experiencing now is, of course, we know that this is not true. And what is important to note is that for the euro sustainability is that the lack of confidence now on the debt of the Mediterranean countries means that people are flying to the German bonds, so which is a eurozone country. So it's not that people are yet flying away from the euro. So we are experiencing something similar to California potential debt within the federal state of the U.S. So right now, what's happened is that there's a flight to quality. People are saying we are not willing anymore to hold bonds of the Mediterranean countries, so then we go and we buy German bonds, and the interest rate on German bonds is at the lowest that we have observed in the past. So the issue is however, in looking more in the long run, is that this is while this can happen, can continue to happen in the short term. The big issue is that the banks in the eurozone hold most of the debt of these Mediterranean countries. So the big risk is not so much in terms of the the pure default that's on the big debt, which is in the end is not so large, but it's the contagion in other countries for which the debt is so large, like Italy or Spain and so on, and the indirect effect on the financial sector, which this will mean that the banks holding these bonds will be in trouble, and these are French banks and German banks. So I think the difference between the Californian problem and the Eurozone peripheral countries is that most of the debt of the Greece and Italy and so on is held by financial institutions in the Eurozone. So this, I think, is the real problem now. And the real risk for the euro is not so much, I think, in the short run, a solution for the financing or refinancing of the debt. Even in the Italian case, the flow of new debt is going to the market. It's not so large. The Eurozone can actually solve that problem.
Right.
So they have to find a solution for the short run, and then they have to find a solution for the longer run, because of course, the euro, when it was created, the idea was that it was backed by a discipline on the fiscal side. So we have rules on the fiscal, on the budget deficit, on the debt, and now without those rules, the euro is not sustainable. But I think one should distinguish the short-term problem or the potential
from the long-term
crisis from the long-term, because actually, as correctly you said, the debt is growing everywhere. It's not only Greece or Italy and so on. The debt, as a result of the crisis, the biggest financial crisis we had after the war, is growing everywhere. It's growing in countries outside the Eurozone. So this is a short-run issue, and the Eurozone is able to solve that.
It's growing everywhere, but at the same time, the political consequences are being felt everywhere. Here in Europe, countries that have approved belt tightening, such as Portugal, have seen their governments voted out of office. Over in the U.S., what's interesting to note is a new Washington Post ABC News poll that shows that many voters actually are voting for a compromise. 58% of Republicans say their leader's not doing enough to reach a deal. House Republicans, though, for the time being, and it shows just how polarized public opinion is on this issue of debt, still weighing their options.
I'm not going to give up hope on cut, cap, and balance. But I do think it's responsible for us to look at what Plan B would look like. And the leadership had a long conversation yesterday about Plan B. There are a lot of options available to us. There have been no decisions made as yet.
Bill Stewart.
Sir.
The issue of, what's being decided by the economists and what the voters want seem to be two separate things.
I would rather look at the voters versus the politicians. The voters want more money for themselves. Good old Benjamin Franklin once said, as soon as the voters discover that they can vote themselves money, democracy is dead. The politicians want to stay in office. When Fabrizio's talking about the debt going up everywhere, he's totally correct. Why? Why? I mean, the debt in the United States is now almost 100% of GDP, a level which was not seen since the Second World War, and which was attained during the Second World War in order to fight that war. I personally think it was the correct thing to do, but to send millions of people overseas, not to play soccer, but to fight a war. And after that war, there was no question that the United States was going to be able to pay back that debt. It was not serious. That was 120% of GDP. People suspected a downturn. It never happened. And within a number of years, the debt's way down again. This time, why'd they spend the money? Why are they so high?
But wait a minute. Let's turn back the clock a second. 2008, when the financial markets
right, but they had already been up to 60% GDP is debt, because good old George Bush had 2 tax cuts with no corresponding spending cut, and so the debt goes up. Everybody loved that. The years 2000 and 2008 were wonderful. Everybody was earning a lot of money, or almost everybody. But you can't do that forever.
And private institutions loved having really low interest rates for a long period of time.
I mean, Republicans here, I love the Republicans, I love the Democrats, but George Bush not only cut taxes without cutting spending and didn't have enough growth to pay for it at the same time, but then at the very end of his presidency, he goes out and he spends an extra $3 trillion to try and get John McCain elected. That doesn't work. He's out. Obama's in. The debt's gone up $5 trillion since Obama has been in office, and there is no real sign that it's going to stop. That the public wants The public is like an investor. They want tranquility, they want stability. They don't want to watch this on TV every night, as much as they love people like you and me and our friends. They want to watch the soccer team win or the football team win, preferably for Americans. They don't want to watch politicians talking about it, so end it. And they think it can be done with the stroke of a pen. After all, electing Obama was supposed to end it all. And it didn't. And it can't. Because you just can't live beyond your means. And these countries, Greece, the United States, are living beyond their means. California was a slightly different case technically because California has a balanced budget requirement. And when the recession hit, the receipts went down, and the law requires them to cut the expenses, period. There's a big debate in economics as to whether or not such a law should exist for the federal government's balanced budget. If it did, you would have problems, but you wouldn't have this problem.
You wouldn't have this problem, perhaps.
No, it would
but
not be possible.
What you do see is, you said it a minute ago, is people don't want to pay, and the political gridlock depicted in very unflattering terms by political cartoonists such as Jimmy Margulis of the Hackensack Record in New Jersey.
God.
Perhaps we can call up that cartoon now. Going once, going twice. Well, there it is. And there you see Nouri al-Maliki of Iraq and Hamid Karzai of Afghanistan talking about the U.S. default. Maybe they're not ready for self-government just yet. Maliki is telling his counterpart there. Romain Rancière, in all the years that you've been working on these issues, we were all told back in 2007, 2008, when financial markets suffered their worst crash in decades, that this was a huge wake-up call and that people were ready to make sacrifices to redress the system. And yet, in the face of what's being described as last chance summit on both sides of the Atlantic, you still have a lot of people who say, "Hey, I don't want to pay." Were you expecting this sort of resistance?
No, I think you have also to put a bit of a larger perspective. I believe it's not that the years before the crisis were good years for everyone. Income inequality on both sides of the Atlantic was increasing tremendously. And after the crash, essentially it was investors and the bankers that were bailed out. So from that point of view, I think there is a lot of distribution issue at stake. So people are resisting to pay because people also have thought that the gains from the boom years were not shared by everyone, but they were shared on top. They were just whipped on top. And after the crash, the large bailout mostly benefited to the financial sectors and far less to the homeowners. So I think the resistance to pay in light of a society that tend to give more and more to the top of the distribution is something you can expect. So the debate about repealing the Bush tax cut that benefit mostly the rich, and that was the promises of Obama during the campaign, that's not been fulfilled. That I think can create some large type of gap in the societies with people feeling that the government has been kind of hacked by the rich, and they are the one who take most advantage of that. So I think there is this issue, in my view, in the background.
And you have to wonder about reform when we peruse some of the newspapers. The International Herald Tribune this Wednesday with the headline, U.S. financial overall a year old is under attack, with lots of bills being presented before Congress to weaken that. And another headline from the same newspaper where already we know that we talked about it earlier, markets underwhelmed with last week's stress tests. The Herald Tribune writing that 28 of the biggest banks face new rules for higher reserves. How to deal with banks that are too big to fail and would require a taxpayer bailout in an emergency has been the main unfinished business for regulators trying to limit the damage from another banking crisis. Romain Rancière just said that the promise that the mess would get sorted out just hasn't happened. Why is that?
Oh boy, how much time do we have left? I'm one of those rare people who think that the less regulation, the better. And if you let these banks that are too big to fail, you will find that they won't fail as much because there'll be consequences. 6 or 8 months ago, There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal by a guy named Jerry O'Driscoll, who used to work for the Fed, pointing out that in Brazil, we don't have this problem. And one of the reasons we don't have this problem is the corporate governance rules require the board of directors to be personally liable for the losses of the bank. And when the directors are going to lose their fortune, guess what? They hire managers who don't take too many risks. I mean, I don't want to say it's as simple as that, but with the bailout, we socialized risk and privatized profit.
No one had responsibilities for their actions.
Yeah.
What we're also finding,
Well, at least for their losses. For their profits, they still got their bonuses. I'm very glad they did. My wife works in a bank.
Yeah. And as debt contagion spreads, voters in Europe also feeling a growing disconnect with the painful decisions of their politicians. In Italy, where parliament's just passed a massive belt-tightening plan.
It's always the average citizen who pays, the last on the food chain. It's useless for politicians to say during campaigns, I won't put my hands in our citizens' pockets.
Unfortunately, we are in a very bad situation, and people in the government should try and think and examine their conscience.
Not helping the cause of politicians examining their consciences in the Eurozone's third largest economy are revelations of chronic nepotism sent in from an anonymous whistleblowing parliamentary insider. Spider Truman, as he calls himself, has more than 347 fans on his Facebook page. He denounces the perks of Europe's best-paid MPs, perks that include more than just free dental coverage. We're almost out of time, but I got to ask you, Fabrizio Coricelli, when you have a story like that one breaking, is the crisis of confidence with politicians, could that contribute to perhaps investors and the such just no longer believing that the system works?
Absolutely. And there is even something else to add. There is true that the government has adopted a very tough plan for fiscal adjustment, but the current government, there is going to be elections in 2013, and most of the adjustment has been put starting 2014, when there will be another government probably. So it is also important to distinguish the politicians from the voters, as was said before, because this is sort of an irresponsibility of government. This government doesn't want to take the toughest decisions. It's adopting a plan which is going to be very tough, but the popularity will hit the government, which is going to most likely to replace this one.
All right.
And
So,
as you said, Italy, yeah, this is very serious because the market feels that there's a very tough decision to be taken, and it's not obvious that the politicians today are able to take these decisions. Although I would say that the voters,
classic case, Fabrizio,
Yes.
of politicians kicking the can down the road. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But I want to thank you very much for joining us from Sicily. I want to thank Romain Rancière for joining us from Boston, and Bill Stewart for being with us here in our Paris studios. Thank you for being with us for the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's business. We'll have more on this story with Marcus Carlson.